Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. With me here, I've got Rob Parsons, our practice director in our network and integrated security practice within Insights Cloud and Data Center Transformation. My name's Mike Moore, practice development manager. I also work in the network and integrated security space in our practice. Today, we're going to be talking about IoT and secure networking solutions. So I think we're going to start this off quickly by giving everyone a little background on what IoT is and how it's really affecting our networks of today. So I'll hand that over to you, Rob, so you can give us a little background on it.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. So when I look at IoT, it's really the collision between the operation side of the business and the IT environment. You know, it's the devices, whether they be smart devices or sensors or anything that really adds intelligence to the way the business operates. And a lot of times these are things that are added by the operation side of the business because it makes their business operate better, and IT just has to react. So that's where I see IoT starting to happen, and it's kind of the fission that's occurring now, and it's really going to start to explode and grow dramatically, I think, in the coming time. Like we've been preparing for it for a long time, but I think IoT is one of those things that's really tough to prepare for. To have that foresight, because until you find that business critical use case that changes the way that a business operates and has to have that piece of technology, IoT is just something that's there that you're thinking about in the background. But once you hit that catalyst, it really starts to fire and you start moving forward.
And can you give us a couple examples of what these IoT devices look like versus OT devices? I mean, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there, I think, of what actually an IoT device is. I mean, ultimately, it's a device that connects to the internet or some application to get that data, that traffic. But could you kind of go into that, the different types and the differentiation between OT and IoT?
Yeah, so the IoT devices are really where these devices start landing on the network, whether it be Wi-Fi connected or Ethernet or maybe 5G in the future. It's when those devices hit the production network and start feeding data and analytics back in. The OT side of things, really, those are more traditional operational systems. You know, some of the Rockwells and other things out there that are more confined systems that exist in operational environments like manufacturing or something like that. So in that case, they stay isolated, but IoT really happens when those things start to mesh together and that data gets out into the wild, per se, in a traditional network.
Yeah, and so, a lot of things I see too is when we're working with different organizations and leaders and we're implementing network and security solutions, trying to figure out what's on their network, that there's a lot more devices out there than they really know. And even printers could be a good example, right? Because those are internet connected in some situations. And even if those organizations don't have, or even if they do have a well-defined print strategy and how they connect these devices and secure them to the network, what's to prevent those from a business unit taking and buying a printer off the shelf at name your favorite store, plugging that into the network and having some kind of internet service enabled where you could potentially be introducing vulnerabilities into your network. So I think IoT people, a lot of the leaders we talk to, they think it's a specific sensor or a specific device, but really it could be anything that you plug in that is getting some kind of data, whether you want it to be or not.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. And I think you touched on something, or at least it triggered for me. You talked about the more devices, and there are a lot of stats out there that talk about how many devices. I think the other thing that you have to think about is the data that's being created by those devices, both from a couple angles. So, first we have the influx of devices. How do we connect them to the network, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's Ethernet, whatever mechanism we're using to connect them? Then they need to pass that data. Maybe we're going to do the compute at the edge. There are a lot of edge computing technologies out there now, some options from some great vendors, and that's one way to approach it. From there, you could push it into a data center, you could push it up to the cloud, but then you're starting to talk about other technologies that kind of make that happen for us. So you start thinking about SD-WAN or SASE. How do we get as much IoT data as efficiently as possible back to the data center, back to the cloud environment? Once it's there, what are we doing? Are we going to aggregate it? Are we going to store it in its raw form? So do we need a bunch of storage? Thinking about the amount of data that IoT is creating, there's just a huge amount of data. And the fact is, most organizations that are doing it actively recognize the value of that data, and they want to hold on to it so that they can use it to make more intelligent business decisions as they move forward. So the retention becomes a big part of that, and the storage components. Now that you've got this huge store of data, and it may be data on your business operations, it could be data about people or whatever. Now this data is a risky topic, right? You need to think about security with it. So you've got the connectivity, the compute, the data and storage, and now the security of the entire thing. How do you secure the conversation between the endpoint and the network if it's over Wi-Fi? How do you secure the path back to wherever you're doing compute or wherever it's getting stored across a WAN link? How do you secure that data and protect that data, put a walled garden around it or a perimeter and secure it that way? So segmentation becomes a key piece of it as well, and then ultimately the storage. So there's a lot that goes into IoT, and I think I would say that IoT could easily be one of the more complex scenarios that you can work on in a network and security environment because of the fingers that it gets into all the different pieces of the pie. And the real story is that because of the integration that you see with IoT, it's not just as simple as, IT is going to sit down and figure this out. And even within IT, this is complicated because you typically have a network guy and a security guy and a storage guy, and you're going to pull them all together and figure out a solution, right? Well, now it's another layer of complexity because you have the business stakeholders who know what the business needs to do. And you've got your compliance officers that know what you need from a compliancy perspective around security. So it becomes so multifaceted and so many people involved that you really need to have some great perspective and some great vision with where you're going with it. And it's a situation where you want to be proactive. You want to see it coming and be able to prepare for it ahead of time. We've got examples of organizations that we work with that do it both ways, that kind of catch and receive something where the operation side of the business has already done something, but also where they're preparing proactively. And they all wind up succeeding in the end. But the fact is that the plan ahead is definitely a little bit of an easier approach. It's less painful. And Mike, I know you've worked in some environments, probably some of the more catch side of the house in your days in consulting. What were some of the challenges that you found? Were they connectivity based or storage based, or just the layer 8, the communications between the teams? What challenges did you face in the real world out there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the challenges that we would see is a lot of organizations don't implement, and I'm getting a little echo, so hopefully that's not too bad for everyone. There, it went away. So a lot of the challenges I saw is getting devices onboarded into the network. So, I mean, when we're thinking IoT, if you look at the reports out right now, we're seeing that it's really making a big push into all the enterprises and businesses today. Where I think you hit on the point where there was around 50% of those IoT devices being wireless. And I don't even remember the billions of devices that are supposed to be connected by 2020. I think it's in the 15 billion range. But as you go into these organizations and you're implementing solutions like network access control, which is kind of an interesting implementation in itself, because a lot of these businesses that we see, they have it on the wireless, but not the wired. And while 50% of those IoT devices are going to be wireless, we are seeing a lot of wired connectivity as well. So, and if you think about the way traditional networking works, let's go back to the days of VLANs, ACL segmentation, and how each branch is really kind of I hate to use the term, but a snowflake, right? They're all individual. They're all a little bit different. You may have a similar VLAN structure where you segment those devices. You have access control lists that you apply on a switch by switch basis to provide that kind of segmentation and security you were talking about, where we're onboarding those devices, but onboarding is essentially configuring a port on a switch, plugging that device in, or maybe it's a wireless SSID, and giving that access based off of that particular network, right? So that was the traditional way of looking at it. As we're going out and deploying network access solutions, and pick your vendor. There's plenty of great partners that we work with out there, the Cisco's of the world, Aruba's, Fortinets, the list could go on. So I apologize if I didn't name you, because we work with a ton of different partners in this space. But the nice thing about network access control is that you can give that role-based permission to really enforce policy for these devices as they come on. And not only that, figure out what those devices are based off of a unique fingerprint. So if you're plugging in a Rockwell device, like you talked about before, we can dynamically profile that and provide it the access it needs on the network. And a lot of the challenges that we see as we're going place to place is that many organizations don't know what type of devices are in their network. When it comes to the OT side of the house, they usually know, but IT, it could be all these different printers that we kind of talked about before, could be Echoes, could be like Amazon Alexas, could be soda pop machines. I mean, you name it, HVAC controls are all internet connected now. And we've seen in headlines where corporations are getting security breaches through these types of devices. So we need that kind of segmentation down at that access layer where these devices are connecting to. And I mean, ultimately, it kind of goes back to getting all that data from these devices that you were talking about, Rob, and how they can consume that, but how they can connect these devices into the network securely so they're not being susceptible to breaches like that. Did that kind of go what you were asking for?
Yeah, but it triggered something else for me. So you talked about each branch or each site being a little bit of a snowflake, and I know that we both live this scenario. I think about software-defined networking and what it can bring to us, and the ability to help. I wouldn't say remediate, but maybe optimize some of those architectures. And you talked about segmentation and the criticality of that. I think software-defined networking gives us the ability to automate some of those challenges, some of the things that, you mentioned before. Yeah, there's a VLAN structure, but where do you go from there? And then, how do we get more dynamic about what we're doing? So networks of the past were very monolithic. You built the structure and it was there, and it was much like urban infrastructure, right? The roads go where the roads go, and that's kind of how it all fits together, and you can't change it once it's built, or it's a big undertaking to change it. Well, with software-defined networking and the ability to push down automated modifications to the network, or really automate in general, because you've structured things in a way to be able to consume that automation, the ability to make those changes to faster consume new technology, new devices, new security, new whatever it is, software-defined really helps you to do that. So I think about the infrastructure of the past, and if you told me that you were going to have to support IoT on a legacy infrastructure that was purely monolithic, like, wow, that would be a scary undertaking. If I think about 5 years ago, where we're going to go configure every VLAN and every port and every switch for this IoT structure. But if we start talking about software defined, and the scripting, the automation, the pushes that you can put in place to support new IoT devices, to be able to make sure that not only do they come on the network, they get the connectivity that they need to be successful, but they also get the security that they need, so that we don't expose anything from an organizational perspective, don't cause a breakdown in compliance by rolling that out. I think that that's absolutely critical, and is the direction that we're looking when we're trying to help organizations navigate the IoT world, just because of the tool set and the tools that it brings to them to be able to quickly make changes in their environment. So
I want to add on to that too. So when you're thinking about those traditional network topologies, you usually, from a security perspective, have a perimeter, right? So you establish your perimeter at all of your egress points to the internet. So if you're not malicious, you're allowed in. If you are malicious, you get blocked, hopefully, right? So when you think of IoT and how these devices communicate to each other and to their applications and to SaaS-based applications, those flows have fundamentally changed, right? A lot of these devices are machine to machine connections. So you need to put them on a network where they have that communication that they can do between each other. And maybe they're not always phoning home out to send that data back. Maybe they store it with edge compute, like you said, and then that sends it out. But really that traditional perimeter model has changed, right? We have a lot more east-west communication and networks that we're seeing today. Can you kind of expand on situations and security concerns that we see with this influx of east-west traffic?
Yeah, so I mean, it really expands the attack surface, right? So when I think about the east-west security, it's for lack of a better example, you know, it's one of the major breaches that happened several years ago. I think it was an HVAC sensor, right? So without east-west security, what happens is a malicious attacker can come in, compromise a particular device, and then go anywhere east and west. Because like you said, traditional networks have perimeter level security. Maybe you can't go north-south, but you can go east and west. And the fact is, if you can go far enough east or west, you can probably find a device that has a different security mechanism, or, you know, maybe it's not a device, but maybe it's some sort of hole in the security strategy, where then now that attacker can move traffic north and south. And before you know it, they're able to spread organically over time throughout a network, just kind of poking and prodding and finding the soft spots to compromise. So by doing some east-west security, we really get down to the device level, or the device group level, of being able to control and isolate those environments. And that's really what brings a higher level of inherent security.
Right. And I mean, I mentioned that these type of devices don't really have that inherent security. Some may have certificate-based security and authentication, but a lot of these IoT devices, they're just simple devices that their job is to send data. So a lot of stuff unsecured. So definitely that east-west threat is a big issue. When we're talking about east-west though, how do we discover if a device is vulnerable and that it could potentially be malicious, especially in the IoT space where it's kind of a headless device, it doesn't have a user at it? Could you go into some of the tools that are available to us that kind of do the analysis and machine learning to kind of give us a reputation of these devices and help us secure those?
Of course. So, you know, like you said, very few of those devices support any sort of advanced authentication authorization protocols, you know, whether it be EP, BTLS, whatever it may be. And because they're headless, meaning that they don't have a supplicant on them, we typically profile them or posture them. Profiling, you know, basically fingerprint and identify what they are, and based on that, we bucketize them and secure them that way. Or posture, which goes a little bit deeper, sometimes requires an agent to be able to really understand how healthy that device is before letting it go anywhere on the network. So those are kind of the two approaches that we take. You know, typically that profiling or fingerprinting is built into a NAC solution. So you're going to see those solutions from some of the leaders you mentioned earlier, Cisco's, the Arubas, the Fortinets. You know, so those are some that are top of mind. Those solutions do some of the posturing as well. But then there's another layer of context and analytics that can go on top of it. And, you know, there are less options in this space, but you know, one of them what it does is it's a traffic analyzer basically, and it does analysis on the traffic, and based on the traffic patterns, you can make decisions on what's normal. So, for example, if a device normally only communicates east-west and north-south to a particular server, and that's been its MO, its consistent pattern for 90 days. And all of a sudden that device starts reaching out to the internet and trying to pass traffic to a foreign server of some sort. That could be deemed as malicious depending on how you set your rules up and your sensitivity to that type of behavior. So from there, you could decide if you're going to block that, if you're going to quarantine that device until you can further analyze it. But that could be a sign of a compromise. And so those tools exist to be able to analyze that traffic real time and be able to take automated action. Back to the automation of being able to manage this in a dynamic way, because the days of having somebody that sits at a console and looks at 7,000 security alerts every day and cherry picks out the ones that are really important, you have to boil that down for them. There's so much going on modern networks that you have to leverage AI, you have to leverage machine learning to get to the core of what's most important.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I was wanting to have this conversation, because really having a security operations center and having to do that manual analysis of all these different things gets really complicated when you're talking about thousands and thousands of lines of code and different incidences. So having that AI and ML to be able to do a lot of that for you is extremely valuable. So one thing that we typically suggest when you're looking for solutions like this and you're implementing IoT is definitely find something that's open, something that's programmable, or something that was built as kind of an ecosystem to work together, right? Because you're always going to get more visibility and more analytics when you can tie the systems together, right? So if you think of a whole solution portfolio where you can get it from access to secure to SaaS to analytics, I mean, that's the nirvana, right? But I mean, ultimately today, there's so many solutions out there that have REST APIs and have the open programmability where you can interconnect those and get that kind of visibility, no matter really what you have, as long as you're getting those more modern technologies, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we internally have taken steps as well. So we've created a next generation SOC using Microsoft Sentinel as well. So really, something that we recognize as being a need in the market, and have taken steps to be able to help our client base to really address some of these challenges. And you hit the nail on the head. And I think programmability across all platforms is going to continue to be key, because you talked about scale, and with scale comes complexity. But the fact is that these changes that we need to make, and modifications to the network or updates to security, all of those, we're not talking about just making one or two like minute changes anymore, or making a change at a VLAN level and it affects everything. You're doing device level changes for a huge bucket of devices on a regular basis to maintain your security, to maintain your environment. And so that really is something that we have to pay attention to.
Yeah. So here's a question for you. So if someone's listening today that has a network and they're thinking about refresh, they're thinking about their IoT strategy and how they're going to implement a secure solution like this, what would be your advice at where to really start? Is there a certain spot? Do they need to do everything at once? I mean, you think of the expression eating an elephant one bite at a time, right? So where would you really recommend that someone starts down this journey?
Yeah, so I come from a consulting background, much like you do, Mike, and I think that one of the things that you wind up learning early on is the methodology to plan and strategize eating that elephant, because that's always what you're brought in to do. And we've developed a structured methodology that kind of helps us to attack any problem, and it's just a logical approach to it. But for me, it starts with the understanding of the existing environment. So how do you do the proper level of assessment, understand what's out there? And it could be as simple as what's on the network. It could be the Wi-Fi side. It could be a specific IoT analysis to determine what devices are out there. I think of a client that we work with that we really did a lot of great planning, strategizing around their network as we did a new rollout. And we knew some IoT was coming for them, and we planned and we prepared for that. I'll tell you that 3 years afterwards, we went back and did a reevaluation of one of their specific sites and found 3x the amount of IoT devices that we expected to see. What they could tell us about, we found 3x more. So I will say that planning ahead and allowing some buffer for growth or for the unexpected or the unknown, because it will come, is critical. But so starting with that assessment, doing some gap analysis, figuring out where to start. If you're going to modernize your environment, where's your biggest pain point, and work from there. I think having a good baseline is critical. So because of the structure that we took in approaching the technology refresh for that particular client I was just talking about, we were able to go back and measure that 3x growth, right? If you didn't have a baseline, you wouldn't know. You would just know, what you were feeling. You were feeling a slowdown. You were feeling some pain or whatever it may be. You're going to feel that, but you're not going to have a baseline to compare it to. So baselining your performance, both from a network and a security perspective, the pen testing from a security perspective is critical. And then getting into, assessing the security specifically, assess the Wi-Fi specifically, because you're introducing a significant amount of loading to a solution. Legacy Wi-Fi solutions or wireless solutions, 802.11 is a friendly protocol. So the more stuff you put on it, the more overhead you wind up with, and the less efficient the network becomes. So figuring out the right way to baseline that and path forward is critical. And then lastly, the reevaluation period. So once you do implement, it's not a, get the keys to the new car and you're done. You have to make sure that you're doing the maintenance on it. You're checking, you're doing the oil changes and, the tire rotations, the basic stuff, but you're making sure that the environment continues to operate as expected, and you don't get caught by that 3x influx of devices. You catch it at 1x where you're like, this is a trend and it's growing right a little bit, and how do we get ahead of it? So it's really a life cycle that we help our clients to adopt. We help to look at an adoption methodology of how do we make technology efficient in their environment. So that's really the kind of breakdown of where I would go with it. And that's just looking at the network and security side. If I were to bring in some of my peers that specialize in storage and data center and other areas, they're going to have a similar approach, albeit with its own details, but they're going to look at those components that fit into their solution, and they're going to figure out where they are today, what's the path forward, and then how they ultimately reevaluate to manage going forward. And that's whether a client were to manage it or, our managed services environment manages it. That kind of recurring evaluation is something that has to happen.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think to really sum that up, know what you have. So get that assessment to really be able to lay out that roadmap, figure out what your pain points are for your individual business or your organization, and then get that roadmap laid out and kind of tackle that one piece at a time. Because if you're going from a traditional network and you're trying to get to software defined, a fully integrated infrastructure, whether that's software-defined branch, software-defined WAN, software-defined data center, and you want to bring that all together, obviously there's going to be a lot of work streams going on there. You may not have just one team who handles that entire implementation. So making sure that you have the right implementation plan to get all those pieces working together. And to kind of hit on what you said about the Wi-Fi too. I mean, when we're talking IoT devices, this is probably an example you gave me, which is why it's sticking in my head. But a lot of these devices have to phone home either to an on-prem server, or it's a SaaS-based solution. So if you don't have a good wireless infrastructure and a solid RF design, or you had way more devices than you thought and the RF's bad, it could be perceived as a SaaS application issue if you're having problems getting data from that sensor, right? When in reality, it could be all the way down at layer 1 where you just have poor RF. So having that whole view of your environment and a good plan on getting each piece of that implemented is going to be key for the success of any implementation to modernize your infrastructure.
Yeah, so one thing I want to chip in there really quick that you kind of triggered for me is, so far we've talked about the infrastructure, and that's really our bread and butter, so that makes sense. But the infrastructure is horizontal. It fits for any environment. It fits for any vertical. Well, the thing about IoT is you can have all the infrastructure in the world, but you need to get that data and do something intelligent with it. And that's where you get the measured impact on the business. That's where you get your ROI from. And that's something that we do as well. So we've got an entire team of developers that build IoT software to be able to consume that data and monetize or create intelligence with it, whatever the customer needs, either from a completely custom environment or a more modular type of environment as well. So that couples very nicely with what we do around IoT. But I think the point to make is that it's a nice marriage between the infrastructure and the application side, the intelligence side, that really makes IoT work. And so we have to pull all that together. It's something really great about Insight is that we have all those resources in-house to be able to put that together and give a one-stop type of experience and be able to execute to that. I think that that's where one of the challenges have been with IoT in previous years, and we've arrived at a kind of an inflection point now, is that in the past we had kind of a division. We had some folks that were doing great apps around IoT and great intelligence, but the infrastructure wasn't always there. We had some folks that were doing great infrastructure for IoT, but couldn't get the application side. Well, we've really been able to put it all together and, be able to give that holistic experience and really get the greatest ROI out of IoT. And, that just brings me to think about some of the clients that we've helped over the years with it, and some of the outcomes that they've driven with, increased shipping, better turn on revenues. There's so many measured impacts to their businesses and what they've been able to do that has been so impressive, and they've been great stories for what technology's been able to bring to them.
Yeah, and I'll give a good example of that too. So our digital innovation team is the team within Insight that helps build those applications and get that meaningful data out of IoT sensors, where we provide that underlying network and security infrastructure. So we just had a friendly competition where we participated in a hackathon, and we did just that. We used secure networking gear. We actually leveraged Cisco Meraki, and cameras, WebEx Teams, and we did integration where we created a customer care pod, basically. So it was in the healthcare manufacturing space where you could deploy this pod, and it's basically this pod that you buy. It ships out with the cameras. It's got Gojo soap dispensers. It's got all these IoT connected devices. And we have everything pulled into the DI connected platform, or Insight's connected platform. And it takes all the information from that data, whether it's getting people counts, whether there's social distance violations occurring, if soap dispensers are getting low. I mean, all that data is valuable, and it's getting the information out of those sensors and putting it into an application like that where you get meaningful results, where that if a line's getting too long, that you need to get maybe another attendant out there to help you get that line through. Or if you see someone not wearing a mask, you could go out and say, we need to have you put a mask on, or something like that, right? And obviously this is a healthcare type scenario, but really the possibilities are endless. So I think
yeah,
what we can
that's
do
an
with
incredible example, Mike. That's really awesome seeing that marriage between the technology and the application, and really the intelligence that it brings, and the ability that it, the technology can be intelligent, but then it gives the tools to the humans that are involved to be able to make the right decisions for how to move forward, and what changes to make in that particular environment. That's really awesome, and congratulations on the competition. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. We ended up taking first place in the healthcare manufacturing space. So it was a really cool project. I would encourage people to go check it out to see what you can really do with IoT and application and a secure networking infrastructure. So I know we're getting towards the end of our time, Rob. Is there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave with the people listening today, so that they can either follow up or just considerations they should have moving forward with their IT strategy?
Yeah, definitely more to come. Look for a webinar from us around IoT, getting into a bit more of the structure, into more of the details. And I guess I would just leave you with, just be thinking about it, be keeping it in the back of your mind as far as how it's affecting your environments, what new devices are coming on, and when those devices do pop up, ask the questions, ask about security, ask about data, ask about storage, ask about connectivity. And it's not going to look like anything at the surface. You're going to look at one device and go, this isn't a big deal. But when one device becomes 100 devices, or 100 becomes 1,000, what is that going to look like? And have those plans in place. And if you know that you need help with it, or you think that you might be running into these challenges and need some additional support, you know where to find us, and we're happy to help with it. But hopefully we've given you a lot of good stuff to think about today, and really be in front of the IoT conversation, where you're going with it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. I think we had a great conversation today. I hope everyone out there enjoyed and got something meaningful from this. So again, I'd like to thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.